Welcome to 30 Minutes on the Parasha with our friend for the year, Don Yitzchak Abravanel, the 15th century Spanish statesman, philosopher, sage, communal leader. And tonight we're going to be exploring some of his fascinating thought about the subject which dominates much of the book of VaYikra and certainly almost the entirety of the portion of VaYikra, and that's what we're, of course, studying tonight. So Abravanel has a and kind of an extended introduction extends over 17 dense pages about the an introduction to the korbanot, to the sacrifices. And he's very logical, very well organized, and it's a general observation about his approach. And he breaks it down into various sections and chapters, this introduction. And I would like to share with you some of the insights that he presents there about the sacrifice conundrum, or as we've called it, the sacrifice paradox. Um, so let's start with the question of the meaning of the word korban. Korban is usually translated as sacrifice or sometimes offering. The word korban comes from the word karov, which means near. So Abravanel says that the primary meaning of the word korban or derivation is that the one who brings the korban places it on the mizbeach, on the altar, or he brings it into the temple and it's the Kohen who places it on the altar on his behalf. In other words, a person can give charity, a person can give a gift to a friend or to one in need, a person can give to his family, a person can give to the society, and he's giving in a way which may be praiseworthy. It may be, an act of great generosity or philanthropy, and that's all for the good. But what makes a korban special is that he doesn't just give in his community, but he gives and he brings it near to the holiest place that the Jewish people have. And that refers to the Mishkan or to the Beis Hamikdash, and it goes on the Mizbeach, on the altar. And this is true for the korbanot generally. It's not only for a korban which an individual brings, but also those which are mandated by the Torah, like the daily offerings or the special offerings on the festivals. They are brought near, but at a further level, at a maybe more profound and maybe more important level, it also suggests the proximity, the fact that the one who brings the korban brings himself near to God. It is a means by which a person gets close to Hashem. So, in this sense, the word korban refers technically to the fact that it is brought karov, close to the holy place or at the altar, but at a deeper level, it alludes to the fact that it's a means by which a person gets close to Hashem. Now, lurking in the background, perhaps that's not the right word exactly, lurking, but present in the background is our question, which, as we'll see, is not in any way unique to modern man. Is this really a way? Is this really the means by which a person gets close to Hashem? Is this really a kind of compelling or effective way of feeling the proximity to the Almighty? Like I just said, that the one who brings it comes close to his Creator. Is this really the best way to accomplish that? So we will turn to that question in a short while. He explains, and actually it goes into this in a lot of detail, that the whole institution of korbanot requires an explanation. But in addition, in order to appreciate it, we cannot just offer an explanation for the institution, but rather we have to seek to understand the significance or the symbolism or the effectiveness or the benefit of the various types of korbanot. The korban which is brought as an expression of gratitude, the korban which is brought in the hope or prayer for good things ahead, a korban which is brought because if a person has sinned and he's required, according to the Torah, to bring a sin offering. Of course, we have korbanot which are part of the communal, the national sort of rhythm of our relationship with Hashem, which is the Korban Tamid, the daily offering in the morning and in the evening. Then we have the Korbanot that are brought on special occasions. So he explains, and we won't do all of that tonight, but just by way of appreciating his very thorough approach, how each of those korbanot have their own significance and their own intent, their own symbolism. So he, as I said, looks to illuminate the various types, and he's quite lucid in clarifying what they have in common with one another, what distinguishes them one from the other as well. So, as I keep saying, we won't do that in detail, but I will share with you a point he makes near the beginning, and that is that the animals which are offered are particular animals. That is to say, particular species. Bakar is from the herd. Minhat tzon is from the flock. Now, the flock includes tzon. The word tzon, Sadi Aleph Nun, includes both sheep and goats, and occasionally they're used almost interchangeably. Sometimes they are distinguished one from the other, but those are collectively the three types of animals that are part of the sacrificial system. Bakar is from the herd, that is a bovine. Keves is a sheep or a lamb or a ram. It's all the same species. And Aiz is a goat, or Seir is another word for a goat. So, Brahmana has more than one approach to explaining why these three particular types of animals. I mean, the simple answer, which he also gives, is that these are the domesticated animals. The Torah doesn't say you can bring, or you have to bring a deer, or you have to bring a gazelle, or you have to bring a hind. I mean, those are all related families because they're hard to catch. And if you do catch one, it's often not easy to slaughter it in accordance with Torah requirements. You can buy kosher venison, by the way, in certain expensive hotels in New York, probably in Israel as well, but it's quite a specialty novelty item. Obviously, a lot of animals are not kosher in the first place, but even those that are kosher, the Torah only mandates the use of animals which are readily available from the bovine family, from the herd, from the flock. That he says again at the Derech Hapshat. Exploring a bit more deeply, he says that these three types of animals should correspond to the patriarchs. Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov correspond to Bakar, Keves, and Aiz. And this I've seen in other sources as well, that the Bakar, the bull, alludes to Abraham because the pasuk says El Habakar Ratz Abraham. The Torah says that Abraham ran to the herd when he wanted to offer to prepare. He wanted to offer lunch or breakfast, maybe for those passing Bedouins. So it says El Habakar Ratz Abraham. Also, he says that the bakar, the bovine, the cow or the bull, is much larger than the sheep. By the way, a quick Google search suggests that the value is about 10 times the value of a sheep. So it's a much more of a sort of extravagant commitment. But in a sense, is the largest, and Abraham is the greatest or the first of the patriarchs. He's like the Gadol Ha'avos. He's the one who is the originator of the Jewish people. He doesn't say this, but Abraham also is the one who inspired, or the one who is seen as the patriarch of the other religions as well, of the so-called Abrahamic religions. And that's not just an accident, that's part of our tradition as well, that Abraham is Av Hamon Goyim. Rabbeinu Bechaya says that Abraham is the father of all monotheists as well. So Avram, in that sense, corresponds to the Bakar. The Keves, the lamb or the ram. So, of course, this is obvious how it's connected to Yitzchak. In the liturgy on Rosh Hashanah, we mention it a few times. And, of course, we know about Akedes Yitzchak, how the sacrifice of Isaac was aborted or was halted at the last moment, and instead a ram was offered in his place. So Avraham is associated with the ayal, with the ram, or the kevis. It's the same species. Um, then we have and he mentions one or two other associations. Then the A's, of course, this is also explicit in the Torah. When Rivka told Yaakov that your father wants to give a blessing to his firstborn. Esav is so unsuited to receive the blessing, you should impersonate him, and your father will give you the blessing instead. Now, obviously, that's a very well known and in some ways a challenging passage, but in any case, she said to him, Rivka said to Yaakov, go to the flock and bring me two goats, Shnei Gidei Izim. So here we see how Avram is associated with Bakar, Yitzchak is associated with the Keves or the Ayel, and Yaakov is associated with the A's, with the goat. He just adds on that we find two other examples that can be used as offerings in a limited way, but the Torah specifies or legislates the use of certain other animals, and I'm referring to tor and gozal. These are like the dove or the turtle dove, and those birds as well, which are specified for Metzora and for other purposes as well. And he says this corresponds to Moshe and Aharon, which is interesting. But then he goes further about the three, and he says that they can also be understood in a further way, and he points out in an imaginative way that the Jewish people are also likened to these three. He says that the Jewish people are likened to a par or a para, not really in a complimentary way. He quotes a pasuk that the Jewish people are paras sorara, a wayward cow that's sort of lost its way. Um, we find that the Jewish people are likened to the tzon, to the flock, like it says, "Tziilach beikvei hatzon," follow the path of the shepherd. We have also Sepuzura Yisrael. The Jewish people are likened to not so much a lost lamb, but a lamb that has wandered off, a lamb that is separated from the flock. Set Puzura Yisrael, and we have the famous imagery which he mentions as well of the Jewish people as a lamb surrounded by 70 wolves, in which the 70 nations of the world are likened to the predators, the predacious wolves, and the Jewish people are the one lonely, isolated lamb. Uh, for A's, so I guess that in Abarbanel's mastery of the Tanakh, I suppose he wasn't able to find where the Jewish people are actually likened to a goat. Esav is, but the Jewish people are not. But he's got another trick up his sleeve. The word A's, meaning a goat, is spelled Ayin Zayin, but the same spelling is found in Tanakh and elsewhere as for the word Oz. Oz means strength. So he quotes a pasuk in Isaiah 25, verse 3, just in case anybody wants to look it up. Yechabducha am az. That you shall be honored. The prophet says to Hashem, you shall be honored by the ferocious people. Az not quite ferocious. Az is like tenacious people, referring to the Jewish people. So although the word az means powerful and strong and maybe tenacious, but it's spelt in the same way as A's, which means a goat. He also quotes the Gemara in Beah that says, Shalosh Azim Haim. There are three which are like, let's say, tenacious or maybe ferocious. And one of them among nations, the Jewish people, is Az Bagoyim, because we don't relent quickly, we don't abandon our convictions readily. The Jewish people have that tenacity. So in any case, you have the word Oz, which is spelled the same as A's. So Abravanel finds a further remez to the Jewish people in the choice of those three animals. But as I said, he acknowledges that probably the derech hapshat is that those are just animals that were domesticated and, of course, are kosher and would be the most readily available. Now, I want to devote our time that we have left to the compelling and challenging question, which really gives rise to our title tonight, the sacrifice conundrum, of what's the reason for this whole sacrificial system. So the Rambam is the starting off point for, as far as I'm aware, of anyone who, all of the commentaries and great sages who take up this question. So they all start with the Rambam, and as we'll see shortly, they're not all happy with what the Rambam has to say. So in More Nevuchim, Guide for the Perplexed in book 3, chapter 32, just in case you want to look it up for future reference, he says that the sacrifices were not commanded to the Jewish people like as plan A, if we want to put it a bit crass, but that's what the Rama means. It was plan B. It was only a kind of uh, uh, alternative or fallback position that was necessitated by circumstances, but it was never part of Hashem's ideal vision for the destiny of the Jewish people. Now, it's a bit like facetious to speak in terms of God's ideal vision, his first plan, his second plan. He had to abandon plan A, fall back on plan B, because, of course, Hashem is completely omnipotent. He is completely in control of earthly affairs. He is also omniscient. He can foresee the future. So we have to understand what the Rambam means even in that regard, but that's not our particular subject for tonight. Let's work with the perspective which the Rambam uses, that from the Torah it is evident that it was not the ideal, and although the Torah does legislate for the sacrificial system in a lot of detail, but it's only a kind of concession to human frailty. So let me explain what I mean, and I'm going to paraphrase here what the Rambam says. He says in antiquity, the pervasive manner of divine worship involved sacrifices. He says, Kol ha'amim regilim bo, all of the nations of the world were accustomed to it. The means of serving their gods, including pagan gods, that was pervasive, that was ubiquitous in the ancient world, was to offer animal sacrifices. He's possibly alluding, he says, Ba'alei Chaim, he's possibly alluding to the phenomenon of human sacrifice as well. That was the norm in antiquity. And obviously, I'm sure you're aware that archaeology and early human history confirms that. Even later human history confirms that very, very well. It's well known. So says the Rambam that when the pagan nations would prostrate themselves to their gods, and they would pray to their gods, and they would worship their gods, they would bring sacrifices to them. Now, that's not a reason for the Jews to do it. That's a reason for the Jews not to do it. But says the Rambam that it wasn't practical. Human nature is such that it wasn't feasible for Hashem to say that even though in Egypt they've done sacrifices, animal sacrifices, and in all the other nations that you, the Jewish people, have visited or ever heard about, that's what they do, but you're not going to do it. It may have been the ideal, but it was not achievable. Says the Rambam, he says, because human nature is to always follow that which is familiar and that which is the norm for human society. And he says, imagine if today a prophet in our time, says the Rambam, would come and he would say that the way to serve God is not through prayer and not through fasting and not through pleading or hoping or seeking to win divine favor through acts of kindness or acts of religious devotion, but rather the service of God should just be in the mind, just intellectual. Don't do anything. Don't engage in any kind of personal prayer, communal prayer, acts of communal, ceremonial, or for that matter, inspirational endeavor. Don't do any of that. Just think about God. Would such a prophet be embraced? Would such a prophet be, not to say popular, but would such a formula have any chance for winning widespread acceptance? The Rambam implies that no, such a thing would not be achievable. And this essentially is the position of the Rambam. Abravanel doesn't quite spell that out here, but according to this approach, the reason for the karbonos and the reason for the whole sacrificial system in VaYikra that we're going to read this week and coming weeks, and the reason for that matter of the construction of the Mishkan, which was essentially a place for these offerings and sacrifices, not only animal sacrifices, by the way, there was flour and there was oil, there was wine, other types of libations. They had different types of bread as well. So it wasn't only blood and gore, but all of that whole system was performed in the Mishkan, and the Mishkan itself, according to this approach, was only a plan B, only a concession to the frailty of human nature, including Jewish nature, that was on display at the time of the sin of the golden calf. When Hashem gave the Torah to the Jewish people in the Ten Commandments, for example, and even prior to that, there are certain commandments given like HaChodesh Hazeh Lachem. We don't find any reference to sacrifices. We don't find any reference to, even though we do find that Moshe made an altar. We'll get to that in a moment. But says the Rambam, or certainly this is the implication of the Rambam, it was all a consequence of the tragic events of the sin of the golden calf, and that is what necessitated the Mishkan, etc. Interestingly, just parenthetically, Rashi seems to agree with that as well, because Rashi says, as is well known, Ein mukdamu mu'achar b'Torah, and even though the Torah describes the sin of the golden calf after the instruction of the Mishkan, if you just remember it this way, it's easy to recall. Truma, after the giving of the Torah, which is in Yisro, then we have Mishpatim, which is about communal laws and interpersonal relations and commerce and that sort of thing, substantially. Then we have Truma and Tetzaveh. Then we have Kitisa. Kitisa contains the narrative about the golden calf. Then we have Yakel Pekudi, which is a kind of capitulation, a recapitulation of it. But my point is that Rashi says that actually the instruction for the Mishkan was after the Chet HaEkel. Abravanel doesn't agree with that, by the way. But that's Rashi's approach, and that would appear to be the view of the Rambam as well, in which it was only the sorry, tragic incident of the golden calf which showed that the Jewish people were incapable of serving God in an intellectual manner. Only they needed the form and the structure, and including an image, which, of course, the golden calf was a terrible betrayal of the destiny of the Jewish people. And therefore, the whole sacrificial system was introduced in order to, like, serve as to provide parameters and limitations. Only certain times, only certain places, only certain people, only certain types of animals. Okay, so much for the Rambam. Ramban excoriates the Rambam. He is scathing in his rejection. He writes at some length, but Abravanel only quotes him briefly to convey the gist of his approach. Ramban Kosav She'ela Dvarim Hem Divrei Havai. These are words of emptiness, of foolishness. Ya'asu Shulchan Hashem Mego'al. The Rambam is turning the table of God into something disgusting. It's disgusting because it was only legislated to, in a way, mimic the pagans and to distinguish us from the pagans. Since the real primary ideal distinction, which is we don't do any of those things, was not practical, so in order to prevent Jewish people from falling into the habits of the pagan worship of the other nations, Hashem said, okay, you need a sacrificial system, you're pining for it, I've got one for you, but it's quite limited in its scope and in the sense that only, as we said, certain individuals, Kohanim, and that sort of thing. So says the Ramban, according to this, it's all the Hotzimi Liban Shel Rishaim V'Tipshei Olam. It's just to refute the wicked people, the foolish people, Shigaon HaAvodah Zorah, the madness of idolatry. That's the whole reason for it. V'Kasuv Omer Kihem Lechem Ishe Hashem. The Torah says that these sacrifices are the bread of the fire of God. We have many other expressions like that. And the Ramban goes on to say that Noach brought an offering. There was no idolatry in the time of Noach. there probably was before the flood, but after the flood, it's finito. It was just Noach and his family. He brought an offering then. According to the sages, Adam brought an offering. Cain and Hevel definitely brought offerings, and presumably they were not idolatrous at that time. I mean, Cain may have been guilty of fratricide. He murdered his brother, but we don't see that he worshipped idols. Hevel was a decent guy. He didn't really amount to too much. He didn't have a chance. Uh, but there was no idolatry then. Also, the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, they had plenty of idolatry at that time, but we don't find that their offerings were as a way of refuting the idolaters. We find that they were doing something which probably was the norm, and we don't find any suggestion that the patriarchs did it in their day, but we don't do it nowadays. On the contrary, the Torah, as we're just discussing now, has the whole elaborate system of the sacrificial approach. Says Ramban that this approach of Rambam is completely unconvincing. The notion that it was all a sort of plan B and all a concession to human frailty. Says Abarbanel. So he quotes a certain commentary on Moreh Nevuchim called the Narboni, which I don't want to dwell on right now. But so Abarbanel is not impressed with the defense of the Rambam of this Narboni, but he says, Mitas ha'inyan hu the clarity, the clarification of the system of this matter is the following. Sharav hamores sover shatfila v'hatchina v'hatalmud Torah, the sage, meaning the Rambam, Harav Hamora, the great rabbi whose More is the guide, the great guide, Moreh Nevuchim, he maintains that prayer and supplication and Torah study and fasting and praying out to God and tzitzis and tefillin and mezuzah and these mitzvahs, they're all part of our service of God. They are things which are ubiquitous. They're not limited to a time and a place. We in the Jewish world have not had sacrifices the way the Torah describes in VaYikra and elsewhere for a long, long time. And yet the religion carries on. And even before meaning when the sacrificial system was in place, but we still had prayer, we still had tefillin, mezuzah, tzitzis, Torah study. He said these are the essential and the eternal forms of the service of Hashem. What the Rambam means to say is that those were the original intent. The need for the karbonos, he said, was introduced primarily in order to refute avodah zarah. But he does acknowledge, Abarbanel does acknowledge, that there's a positive aspect to it as well. But he first proceeds to substantiate and to validate the view of the Rambam. He says that we find, and the Rambam quotes this as well, but Abarbanel elaborates further, that we find that the prophets denigrate the reliance on offerings. We find Isaiah and Jeremiah, even Shmuel as well, the earlier prophets, and many others, they say that this like fixation on the sacrificial system is leading you astray because it makes you imagine that if you sin or if you act in a corrupt or degenerate way and you bring an offering that all will be forgiven. He says this kind of hypocrisy is abhorrent to God. Moreover, we have many other passages which say that when Hashem brought you out of Egypt, He didn't command you on that day about sacrifices. Again, the remez is it was only after the Chet HaEgel that it became necessary. So he then quotes from the words of the sages as well, and he says, "Kol ha'osik b'Torah einut tzarich lo chatas v'lo ola v'lo ashim v'lo mincha." The Rambam quotes that passage in the in the Talmud in Menachos, that one who studies Torah, he doesn't need the burnt offering, and he doesn't need the sin offering, he doesn't need the guilt offering, he doesn't need the flour offering, because the study of Torah, the uh, way that Torah study brings a person close to God, that it gives a person a better understanding of the world around him, a better understanding of himself. That is the path to spiritual achievement, and this is found in the way the rabbis interpret the Torah, like as if to say that the sacrificial system is a like a second best, so to speak. Um, and he goes on to defend the Rambam, and our time is pretty much up, so I'll just add a few more words that Abarbanel says. Uh, he says that V'tamahani meharav Nachmeni, he says, I'm amazed that the great Ramban Shaya Gemara lefanav k'shulchan aruch, the Talmud was open before him like a set table. In other words, he had total mastery over the Talmudic literature. Abarbanel says that about Ramban. Eich lo ra'a ma'amar hazeh. How could he overlook that statement and others that are found in Chazal Israel? Ki hu maskim l'divrei harav hamora, which validates the position of the Rambam. Hine hisba'er shemin Torah umin neviim umin ksuvim. He said, we see now from the Torah, from the prophets, from the writings, midivrei Chazal, from the words of the sages, Baharbe Mekomos, in many places, Yesh Siyua Gadol L'divrei Harav Hamora. There's a great support for the words of the Rambam. Ve'inam Bezeh Divrei Havai, and they're not words of foolishness, Ele Divrei Kedusha, but they are words of holiness. Now, I just want to add in 2 minutes a further thought. So we have the Rambam's view that the Karbonos were intended to refute idolatry, but at the same time, a kind of concession to the frailty of the human nature. According to this, the end of the sacrificial system is actually something that perhaps we should celebrate, because we still have enough mitzvahs to keep us occupied for a lifetime. And there have been certainly great people in every generation who have been very holy and very saintly and very sagacious people who provide leadership for us and examples for us in all the generations. And to get to the real kicker, which again is probably on your mind, I hope it's on your mind, do we really crave the return to the sacrificial system? It features in our liturgy, features in our tefillah, it certainly features in the prophets as well, looking forward to the time of the restoration of the Beis Hamikdash and all of that. And the Rambam in Mishnah Torah speaks about exactly that, in the expectation that in the Messianic era it will all be restored. And this is a conundrum that needs to be elucidated. And I'd like to share with you an approach which sheds some light on this. And that is the view that is found in the Talmud in Sanhedrin about just to get to the crux of it, that in earlier times, in antiquity, the desire for sacrifices was intense. It was like a kind of craving. And that desire, usually for most people in the world, took the form of pagan worship. And the desire for Avodah Zarah, for different forms of heathen and pagan worship, was so intense that it was irresistible for most people. Probably a lot of people didn't even try to resist it. But those who did try often struggled to achieve that. It was only with great difficulty or with great spiritual or intellectual heroism that a person was able to say, idolatry is not for me, it's not for a Jewish person. Over time, that craving for sacrifices and for idolatry waned. We find in the Second Temple already many instances in which the whole sacrificial system was breaking down. The Kohanim were not as righteous as they were at one time. And many of the systems that the Torah describes, in which the sages describe, actually was not functioning properly in the days of Bayis Sheni. By the time the second temple was destroyed, however, we find that idolatry is on its way out as well. Already in the waning decades of Bayis Sheni, we find the rise of Greek wisdom. Now, Greek wisdom, the rabbis are not great fans of Greek wisdom. However, Greek wisdom represents also the germ of philosophy, of understanding science, of medicine, of the scientific method, of the understanding the world and recognizing the folly of idolatry. Even though the ancient Greeks were philosophers and they're also idolaters, but over time, idolatry gradually and ultimately, well, in the Western world, was completely retired. So, I want to suggest that it could be that in Messianic times, the desire for closeness to Hashem will once again be intense. Prophecy may once again be restored to the Jewish people. And at that time, the craving for idolatry may also be a force to be reckoned with. And the appreciation for the effectiveness of the carbonos may once again be part of the human experience. It's not in the current generation and has not been, I would say, for a long time. But when Mashiach comes, that may be transformed. We may return to a circumstance in which the desire for the relation with Hashem will be so intense that the sacrificial system will once again be appreciate and that we will value it once more. What will actually be when Mashiach comes, I'm not in a position to say, and but I am suggesting that maybe even though Abarbanel is, I'm sorry, Ramban is very down on the Rambam's suggestion, but perhaps the Rambam is referring to a world in which the need for the sacrificial system reflects the challenge of paganism, and we no longer live in that world. And when Mashiach comes, we'll discover, I'm sure, a world renewed. So I think I'm sorry I've gone over by a few minutes, but this is an introduction to the whole book of VaYikra, and I hope it has been worthwhile for us all. I just want to say that next week, this coming Wednesday, we are doing on the same station, we are doing a Pesach seminar, pre-Pesach seminar, your questions answered, Pesach to perfection. It's going to be an opportunity to look at some practical aspects of celebrating Pesach, appreciating Pesach as well, preparing for Pesach. So it's going to be mostly halachic and practical. It'll be a chance for you to ask questions as well. And next Thursday, a week from tonight, we will do Seder inspiration from our friend Don Yitzchak Abravanel. Thank you very much, and Laila Tov. Have a wonderful Shabbos.